Luke chapter 5, verses 36 through 39. He told them this parable: No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new one will not match the old. And no one pours wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No new wine must be poured into new wineskins, and no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better. All right, let's jump in. First thing to know, let me just give you a little bit of context on all of this. People come up to Jesus and his disciples and they ask him about why he and his disciples don't fast, because the disciples of both John the Baptist and the Pharisees fast regularly. In Jewish custom, particularly among the Pharisees, the day of the fast was Monday and Thursday. And they would often read the blessings and curses from the Torah. So God's promises: if Israel does this, I will bless you. If you guys, worship idols, I will curse you. And then some would even cover themselves in ash. And the focus of these fasts was for the nation. They would intercede for the nation. They would lament over the situation they have with Rome. They would pray for the Messiah to come. They would really seek the deliverance of the nation before the Lord. That was what they did every Monday and every Thursday. We know that some of them didn't have the best reasons for doing this. Jesus addressed that on the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. We could assume that John the Baptist's disciples have the right motivation for this. But in any case, this is the custom of the Pharisees and John the Baptist, is this regular fast. But Jesus and his disciples do not. And when they ask him why not, he gives them this parable in response, okay? And let's just kind of follow along in this parable, and we'll figure out how this parable answers the questions that come from this context. He begins: No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the old one will not match the old. If we're just kind of following along here, we just got an analogy, a parable based on garments, okay? And let's look at it piece by piece. No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. This is just an emphatic statement. Nobody does this. So it's kind of an appeal, if you will. Appeal to common practice. Everybody knows that if you have a new garment on a new garment patch and you put it on an old garment, this is what is going to happen. If you do this, otherwise, they will have two things come about as a result. The first is the new garment will be torn. So your new garment is that little piece of new fabric is going to tear this, which doesn't make any sense. It'll also be torn itself from the other one. Mark brings that out in his analogy. 2, the patch from the new will not match the old one, right? Color here is the other issue. So you're going to ruin your new garment. You're going to have things that don't match. Mark will say it'll pull away from the older one. And so the point of this is fairly simple, right? Is that new does not mix with old. And that formation is followed in this second analogy. And no one pours, by the way, this and is just, it's like, it's just building on the first. So this is just a second example. No one pours new wine into old wineskins, same exact formation. Otherwise, if you do this, so same thing here, I'll just highlight this. So the appeal to kind of common practice is right here in yellow. The appeal to common practice is in yellow. And the results, right? Torn garment, nope, match the old. the results are here. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, this wine will run out, and they'll be ruined. So we have this same kind of formation, you will, an A, B type of formation. No one pours new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the new wine will burst the skins. Just a little explanation on this. When you would pour new wine into a new wineskin, the wine would release gases, the new wineskin would stretch, but it's all good. But if you put new wine into an old wineskin, that wine releases the gases, the skin can't stretch anymore. So instead, it bursts the skin, the wine runs out onto the floor, and the wineskin itself is ruined, right? So just all bad things, right? So the second analogy here comes from wineskins. Okay. But then Jesus proposes here the solution. By the way, sorry, both examples have the same thing. New does not mix with old. But the solution is given right here. Here's the solution. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. Obviously, right? So this is a very obvious, very clear analogy. What makes it a parable and what makes it difficult to understand is what is being referenced here. Well, again, back to the context, fasting is what's being brought up. So I'm going to move down here and we'll just create some space. Fasting. What is it? Fasting was a custom, right? Related to Old Testament law, right? Particularly this law. They would read the law on this day. There was no fasting command in the Old Testament aside from certain festivals. But the rabbis noticed that, hey, throughout the Old Testament, when the nation was in trouble, that the people fasted. Well, we should fast. And so there was this custom that's kind of built on Old Testament law. And the analogy here would be then that the custom is the wineskin, and the Old Testament law itself is the wine. Okay? And they match. They work together, right? But Jesus is saying, hey, if I try to take new wine, and I put it into the Old Testament customs, then they're going to burst. This is not going to work. It's like a mismatched patch on a garment. So instead, Jesus says, here's the solution. New wine must be poured into new wineskins. So if kind of custom, if you will, is wineskin, and OT law, and I'll use a different word here, OT covenant, if the covenant here is the wine, then that's the relationship. Then now looking down, what would be the new wine, right? That would be the question. What's the new wine? And the answer is the gospel. The gospel is the new wine. And what is going to be the new wineskin? Love God. Love your neighbor. And then in relation to all of the Old Testament customs, all of the laws about food, about what you wear, about festivals and stuff, from now on, the church is free, right? Because the gospel needs to be poured into this new wineskin, which is to love God and love your neighbor, but it's now going to be removed from some of those Old Testament customs, a lot of these Old Testament customs, otherwise they're incompatible. So if you have all these laws on diet, on clothing, on a Sabbath day, then when you try to get the gospel to the ends of the earth, it doesn't work. You run into too many cultural issues, and you create these stumbling blocks that don't need to be there. And so the new covenant, the gospel, so this is the new covenant, right? As opposed to the old one, has to be poured into new wineskin. And for the Christian, that is freedom. If you want to read more about that, read 1 Corinthians 9, read Romans 7, read Galatians really 3 through 5. And you'll see this way in which we've died to the law. We live in this new freedom. And how do we use this new freedom? We become all things to all people that we might save some. That's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9. So that is the new wineskin in which we live. And the gospel is the new wine which we drink. Now, let's go back up to our text. What makes this all super interesting is Jesus's kind of little comment on the end of this. And this is Jesus's comment on the human heart. He says, and by the way, the reason y'all feel fussy about this is that no one after drinking old wine wants the new. For, like, why is that? Like, why don't people like the new wine? Why do they want the old wine? For, they say, the old is better. And all Jesus is doing is making a comment about humanity, right? This is us. We're like, oh, I like the first movie. The sequel wasn't so good. Oh, I like the old recipe. The new recipe is not so good. I like the way they used to make it. I like the way it used to sound. I like we all like what we fell in love with, and we don't deal with change well. So at this point, like, no one drinking the old wine no one after drinking the old wine wants the new, right? So he's just making the point, like, man, the new wineskin is going to be a stumbling block. Jesus knows that we have a bias that makes the newness of the gospel difficult for many people. So as we think about that, with our own selves, I think that there's a recognition of the bias to say, okay, I better not, just be holding on to something that, the old is better. I don't want to just be doing that for no reason. We don't want to create stumbling blocks for other people. But kind of even more deeply rooted than that is the issue of when we let go of our whole worldview, like the Old Testament law and covenant, Mount Sinai, Moses, all these things, and we pick up the new gospel in Jesus Christ, that is so difficult. That is so hard to do. We're recognizing that this happens. And so we really just remember that it's a miracle anytime anyone becomes a believer in Christ and overcomes this kind of bias that we all have. So within the church, we can apply it in a variety of ways. I think one of them is just to have grace with change. But I think more importantly than that is when we're wrestling with someone and trying to bring them to Christ, we want to just appreciate what's happening, is that this person is changing out old wine and old wineskins for new wine and new wineskins, and that's always difficult. But it's a beautiful parable, and again, back to the original purpose of it all, it explains why Jesus and the disciples aren't going to fast. What this means for us, right, is that fasting is different for us than it was for Israel. Up above, Jesus says, and not in our text, but he says they'll fast. They'll fast when I leave. But we're not going to fast the way that they did. We're not going to fast with sackcloth and ashes and mourning over the sins of Israel. No, we're going to fast seeking the Holy Spirit's direction, seeking the Lord's will, and with eyes filled with hope, looking to the return of Christ, which we know is coming. So that's ultimately what this parable is all about.